Welcome to the Explainer. Okay, today we are tackling something absolutely massive. We're diving into one of the most audacious cinematic events of the decade, Christopher Nolan's staggering 2026 adaptation of Homer's ancient epic, The Odyssey. But definitely strap in, because this isn't just your standard run-of-the-mill translation of a myth to the big screen. No, it is a radical, ground-up overhaul of a story that we all thought we knew so well. So, the crucial question we're exploring today is really this. What happens when the director of Oppenheimer strips all the magic away from history's greatest epic? Homer's 8th century BCE poem is literally the foundation of Western storytelling. It's traditionally built on joyous cunning, active divine justice, and this glorious heroic geographic triumph. But Nolan has completely transformed the whole shebang. He's traded out all that vibrant magical pageantry for a brooding, intense psychological study of trauma, guilt, and existential abdication. Let's see exactly how he pulled this off. Part 1. Reimagining an ancient epic, stripping the mythic elements. Let's get right into it. Right off the bat, the structural compression here is immediate and honestly pretty jarring. Homer's traditional epic famously begins in medias res, meaning right in the middle of things. It relies on this massive narrative framing device where a safe, comfortable Odysseus recounts his past exploits to a captivated audience. Well, Nolan discards that safety net entirely. Instead, he charts a direct, incredibly solitary course for his protagonist, starting right from the grueling, agonizing task of building a raft from scratch on Calypso's island. There are no comforting flashbacks here, it's just the immediate, harsh reality of survival. Now, that compression comes at a steep narrative cost, which is kind of exactly the point. Nolan ruthlessly cuts all those traditional episodic elements that lighten the mood. So there is no benevolent King Alcinous, there's no Princess Nausicaa, and no civilized Phaeacian court to act as a narrative safety valve when things get rough. He even eliminates the magical bag of winds from Aeolus. Think about that for a second. In Homer, the crew greedily opening that magical bag right as they spot the shores of Ithaca is this cruel, almost folkloric punchline that sets them back. But by cutting those external mishaps and whimsical divine interferences, Nolan forces a brutal reality. He shifts the entire psychological weight of failure directly onto Odysseus' own shoulders. And this intense grounding effect, it trickles right down into the action sequences too. Even the legendary monsters undergo a complete physical and tonal recalibration. Take the terrifying Laestrygonians, for example. In Homer's Book 10, they are mountain-sized titans spearing sailors like fish. It's a primal, cosmic terror meant to emphasize how powerless mortals are. Nolan brings this crashing down to reality. He turns them into towering, heavily armored enemy soldiers. It becomes a tactical, muddy, completely desperate ambush that perfectly fits modern cinematic warfare. It makes the terror visceral and human rather than mythical. All right, moving on to part 2, a psychological journey home, theme and character. To really grasp this huge thematic shift, we first need to define a foundational ancient Greek concept, nostos. In the original epic, Nostos is a sacred, geographical homecoming. It's the grand return voyage. The entire tension of Homer's story rests on whether Odysseus can physically cross the ocean, navigate the treacherous islands, and reclaim his rightful throne before his time runs out and his household is stolen from him. Nolan, however, totally fractures this concept. While Homer's Nostos is all about geographic triumph and conquering physical space, Nolan treats time as a fluid, deeply fragmented element. His Nostos is about profound psychological dislocation. The journey isn't just about navigating a map anymore. Its nonlinear textures trace how decades of brutal, intimate violence warp a survivor's memory. The real turbulent ocean Odysseus has to cross here is his own fractured mind. Which brings us to probably the biggest thematic shift of the entire film, the secularization of the cosmos. Homer's epic is deeply theological, right? The gods are active, physical arbiters of a moral universe. Athena guides him, Poseidon punishes him. Nolan completely demythologizes this ancient framework. Divine interventions are entirely internalized. They manifest as PTSD-induced hallucinations or just desperate psychological coping mechanisms. He completely trades metaphysical accountability for intense, modern psychological interiority, where the ghosts haunting Odysseus are purely of his own making. This internal focus brings us to a second crucial Greek term tied directly to identity, and that's metis. Metis translates to joyous, adaptive cunning and trickery. It is the literal spark of brilliance that allowed Homer's Odysseus to outwit Cyclops, bewitch sorceresses, and dismantle a house full of violent suitors. It's the steadfast, defining identity trait of the triumphant, wily king. But Nolan totally subverts Midas. His Odysseus is completely stripped of that traditional Homeric confidence. Instead of a quick-witted trickster who revels in his own cleverness, he's a brooding, internally conflicted figure. He is burdened by a fragile, fractured identity. Honestly, he resembles a guilt-ridden thriller antihero far more than a joyous adventurer. Part 3. The Nolan protagonist lineage. Wily king versus brooding war criminal. When you look at this iteration of Odysseus, it fits so perfectly into the director's signature auteur obsessions that it almost feels inevitable. Just think about Memento and Inception for a second. Much like those iconic protagonists, Odysseus bears the crushing burden of fractured memory, with repressed guilt manifesting as labyrinthine internal obstacles. Then look at Oppenheimer. Odysseus engineered the Trojan horse, right? He's the brilliant, celebrated architect of mass devastation. His journey is a reckoning with the human toll of his own tactical genius. Finally, consider the Dark Knight trilogy. Just like Bruce Wayne, Odysseus grapples with the immense weight of power, ultimately choosing self-effacement over a crown built on relentless bloodshed. Part 4. The controversial finale, restoration versus exile. So, Homer's original ending features the violently cathartic slaying of the suitors in the Great Hall. Odysseus weathers a massive revolt that is only halted by Athena's literal divine truce, leaving him firmly reinstated as the undisputed king of Ithaca. Nolan outright rejects this conservative resolution. He omits the skirmish with the suitors' relatives entirely. Instead of confidently stepping back into his royal role, Odysseus makes a shocking choice. He actually cedes the crown to his son Telemachus and sails quietly into exile with Penelope. It is a really bleak, profoundly bittersweet finale. Nolan swaps out the neat Homeric closure for a cyclical meditation on the burden of leadership and the inescapable weight of history. Odysseus and Penelope leave to seek penance for the moral costs of the Trojan War. After 20 years of fighting just to get home, he simply refuses to settle into a comfortable domestic peace. He's acknowledging that the man who left Ithaca is absolutely not the man who returned. Part 5. Betrayal or cinematic masterpiece, the critical debate. Unsurprisingly, this radical finale and the overall secularization of the myth triggered a fierce scholarly divide. Take this incredibly harsh critique from scholar Daniel Mendelsohn to illustrate the genuine frustration out there. He said, "The film commits a fundamental betrayal of the text, erasing Odysseus's trademark wit and reducing a complex mythic hero to a generic, guilt-addled archetype." For many classicists, taking away the hero's foundational resourcefulness and charm was simply a bridge too far. Now, to truly understand the critic's anger here, we have to recognize two more ancient values. The first is kleos, which translates to martial glory, something that was very openly celebrated and sought after in ancient Greek culture. Critics argue that Nolan projects a distinctly modern anti-war sentiment onto an ancient culture that historically revered this exact kind of violent martial triumph. The second huge cultural pillar at stake is xenia, which is the strict religious adherence to guest, friendship, and hospitality. Scholars point out that by completely secularizing the universe and removing the gods as the moral enforcers of sacred rules like xenia, Nolan's skeptical worldview fundamentally ignores the vital theological core of the ancient text. The fear of Zeus's wrath is what kept ancient societies functioning. Without it, they argue, the context is completely lost. So, we're left with this really fierce debate. The critique insists this film is a fundamental betrayal, a modern director selfishly projecting contemporary, secular anxieties over an ancient, culturally rich civilization. But the defense argues that Nolan succeeds precisely because he refuses a slavish visual reproduction. They argue that Homer's text resists easy cinematic translation anyway, and that Nolan brilliantly uses the bones of an ancient myth to interrogate modern trauma in a tight, philosophical meditation. Now, in this explainer, we're absolutely not here to pick sides. Ultimately, the result depends entirely on what you seek as a viewer. If you want the triumphant, vibrant, episodic pageantry of Homer's wily king overcoming mythological beasts, yeah, you might genuinely feel betrayed. But if you are looking for the melancholic echo of a modern director's mind, dissecting the long-term effects of memory, trauma, and the ultimate surrender of power, well then, it is an incredibly profound reimagining. So I'm going to leave you with this final provocative thought. What do you think? Is Christopher Nolan's 2026 epic the ultimate betrayal of Homer, or is it a masterpiece of modern translation? It's a heavy question for sure, but one that proves just how alive, flexible, and utterly relevant these ancient myths still are today. Thanks for joining me on The Explainer, and keep questioning the story.